April 23, 2026. A construction site in Barrhaven, a suburb of Ottawa. The ground is still cold. The foundation is half poured. And Canada's Prime Minister is standing in a hard hat in the middle of a trade war, announcing something that should have been the lead story on every network in the country. It wasn't, because Washington was louder. But here is the thing about noise. It covers things. And what got covered on April 23rd was one of the most consequential housing announcements in Canadian history. A package of overlapping policies that, taken together, puts up to $158,000 back in the pocket of a first-time homebuyer in Ottawa before they ever sign a contract. Not a rebate they wait 6 months to receive. Not a tax credit buried in a return they file next spring. Savings built directly into the price of the home at the moment of purchase, already law as of March 12, 2026. Think about what that number means for a moment. The average Canadian household has been spending more than half of their income on mortgage payments. More than half. That is not a housing market. That is a mechanism for keeping an entire generation locked out of the economy they were told they would inherit. And $158,000 in savings does not fix that overnight. But it opens a door that has been sealed shut for a very long time. For a young couple in their early 30s, call them the Wins, both working, one in healthcare, one in skilled trades, renting a 2-bedroom in Canada, and watching their down payment goal move further away every single month. That number is not a policy announcement. It is the first morning in years where the math actually works. We know what happened on that construction site in precise detail because it was covered, just not properly. We have the Prime Minister's remarks. We have the City of Ottawa Council minutes from the unanimous vote on April 22nd, the evening before. We have the Build Canada Homes project commitments, 13 partnerships, 10,000 units across 6 Canadian cities, filed in federal disclosure. We have the Canada-Ontario Partnership Agreement worth $8.8 billion, which underpins the development charge cuts. And we have the royal assent record from March 12th, confirming that the GST elimination on new homes up to $1 million is now Canadian law. This is not analysis built on leaks or speculation. These are documents. These are votes. These is concrete. Let us go back to September 2025. That is when Carney launched Build Canada Homes, a federal housing agency with a single mandate and a $13 billion budget. Not a task force, not a working group, an agency with authorities, with financing tools, and with access to one of Canada's most underused assets, federal crown land sitting in the middle of cities where housing is most desperately needed. For decades that land sat. Rezoning battles, bureaucratic delays, political timidity. It sat while rents climbed and while a generation of Canadians was quietly told the market would sort itself out. The market did not sort itself out. By the time Carney took office, over 10.5 million Canadian households, over 10% of the country, were in what Statistics Canada classifies as core housing need. That means their housing was unaffordable, inadequate, or both. Asking rents had reached levels that made the phrase affordable housing feel like a punchline, and the institutional knowledge required to build at scale, prefabrication, modular construction, geothermal systems, was sitting in private sector silos, never deployed across a national program. Build Canada Homes was designed to break all 3 of those log jams at once. The first tool is public land. The federal government is one of the largest landowners in Canada. The Ottawa announcement alone committed 2,000 units on federal land, bypassing the years-long process of selling Crown land, waiting for rezoning, and then waiting again for private developers to decide whether the margins were worth their time. Under the new framework, that land goes directly into housing production. No auction, no delay. The second tool is early-stage financing. Here is a fact that most housing coverage skips entirely. The reason good projects die is not that they are bad projects. It is that no private lender will touch them in the earliest phase, when the land is being prepped, when permits are being filed, when the project exists only on paper and in the developer's conviction. That is exactly the moment when capital dries up. Build Canada Homes fills that gap. It shows up with financing at the moment of maximum risk, so that the project survives long enough to attract private investment at the next stage. The third tool is construction technology. Prefabricated and modular building methods are not experimental. They are proven. They are used at scale across Scandinavia, Japan, and increasingly in parts of the United States. Canada has largely failed to deploy them in public housing because there was no federal program structured to do so. Geothermal heating and cooling systems, which Carney specifically referenced at the Barrhaven site, cut long-term energy costs for residents permanently. Not a one-time saving, but a structural reduction in the cost of living inside a home that compounds over decades. Since its launch in September 2025, 7 months ago, Build Canada Homes has already committed to more than 10,000 new units through 13 partnerships. Over 1,400 homes are already under construction or will break ground within the next 2 months. Ottawa, Toronto, Winnipeg, Edmonton, Gatineau, Halifax. This is not a promise on a timeline. This is a pipeline with addresses. Now step into the Ottawa numbers, because this is where the announcement stops being federal policy and starts being real estate. The federal municipal partnership between Build Canada Homes and the City of Ottawa is worth $400 million. City Council approved it unanimously on April 22nd. Every councillor, every ward, every party. That kind of unanimity in local government does not happen by accident. It happens when the terms are good enough and the need is urgent enough that there is no political cover left for saying no. The result? 8 new housing projects totaling more than 1,100 rental homes, exceeding the original Ottawa target by 10% before the year is even half over. More than 90% of those units deliver affordable rental housing. The projects span Nepean, Centertown, Sandy Hill, Overbrook, and Lincoln Heights. And they include a specific mandate written into the approvals to prioritize 3- and 4-bedroom units, family-sized homes. The exact product the private market has almost completely stopped building because the margins on studios and 1-bedrooms are better, and the regulatory costs are the same regardless of unit size. This is the detail that never makes the headline. The housing crisis is not just a price crisis. It is a product crisis. Young families need 3 bedrooms. The market is not delivering them. And Build Canada Homes has a mandate to close that gap directly. Carney announced all of this standing at Geyser Place in Barrhaven, the site where 118 of those units will be built, with geothermal heating and cooling systems that will reduce energy costs for every resident permanently. He was wearing a hard hat. The foundation was being poured behind him. That is not optics. That is a prime minister choosing to be where the thing is actually happening instead of where the cameras are most comfortable. Here is what got completely buried under the trade war coverage. and it should not have been. The savings package for Ottawa homebuyers works in 3 overlapping layers, and the only way to understand the full magnitude is to look at all 3 together. Layer 1, GST elimination. Canada's new government eliminated the goods and services tax on new homes priced up to $1 million for first-time buyers. That measure received royal assent on March 12, 2026. It is law. It saves a first-time buyer up to $50,000 on the purchase of their first home. Not applied for, not deferred, gone from the purchase price. Layer 2, development charge cuts. Through the Canada-Ontario Partnership, municipalities can cut development charges in half for 3 years. Development charges are the fees that municipalities levy on builders to fund infrastructure, roads, sewers, transit. They are legitimate in principle. In practice, they had ballooned to a point where they were adding tens of thousands of dollars to the cost of every new unit. In Ottawa specifically, cutting those charges in half reduces the cost of building a 2-bedroom apartment by more than $15,000 and a single-family home by more than $28,000. Those savings flow through to the buyer. Layer 3, Ontario HST match. The province of Ontario matched the federal GST cut with its own provincial HST relief on all new homes up to $1 million. Stack all 3 layers together in Ottawa, and the combined savings reach up to $130,000 on a new home purchase. Add in the development charge reduction, which translates directly into lower asking prices, and the total potential saving reaches $158,000. This is not a tax credit. This is not a rebate. This is money that was previously baked into the cost of the home, extracted by various levels of government at various points in the construction and transaction process, that has now been removed before the buyer ever walks through the door. For the wins in Canada, watching that number land is not abstract. It is the difference between qualifying and not qualifying. It is the difference between their current rent eating 42% of their combined income forever, or a mortgage payment on a 3-bedroom they actually own, at a number that makes the math work for the first time in their adult lives. That is what policy looks like when it is designed for people instead of press releases. But here is what every other outlet is missing, and this is the part worth slowing down for. The coverage of this announcement, what little there was, treated it as a housing story, a nice one, progress on affordability, good numbers, worthy of a segment. But the real story is structural, and it operates at a level that most political coverage never touches. Let me translate what actually happened on April 23rd. Canada is in the middle of an active trade war with the most powerful economy on earth. 50% tariffs on steel, 50% on aluminum, 25% on autos. A deadline 10 weeks away. The United States Commerce Secretary publicly calling Canada's trade strategy, and this is a direct quote, the worst he has ever heard. In that environment, the conventional political playbook says, defend, react, hold press conferences about trade, talk about the border, pivot every domestic story into a narrative about sovereignty and resilience. Carney did not do that, and the absence of that behavior is itself the most important data point in this story. What Carney did instead was stand on a construction site and announce domestic policy delivery, not defensive posture, not a counter-narrative about the United States. Delivery, units under construction, numbers exceeding targets, legislation moving through a majority parliament faster than before. The message was not, we are fighting Washington. The message was, Washington does not determine our domestic agenda. We do. That is a specific psychological and strategic choice, and it reflects a worldview that is worth naming clearly. The belief that a government's most powerful tool in a trade war is not its trade negotiators. It is its ability to demonstrate that the country continues to function, improve, and build while the war is being fought. Canada is the second fastest growing economy in the G7. It holds the strongest fiscal position in the G7. It has signed 20 new trade deals with countries on 4 continents, and it is building affordable housing at a pace not seen in a generation. That combination, economic performance, fiscal discipline, and domestic delivery, running simultaneously with trade negotiations, is not accidental. It is a doctrine, and it is one that borrows from a historical playbook that Carney, given his background as a central banker who navigated the 2008 financial crisis and the Brexit negotiations, knows well. Demonstrate institutional competence at the moment when your adversary is betting on your dysfunction. The historical analogy that fits here is not a perfect one, but it is useful. In the early 1980s, Canada's federal government and the provinces were simultaneously dealing with a constitutional crisis, a deep recession, and deteriorating trade terms with the United States. The governments that emerged from that period strongest were the ones that kept building infrastructure, institutions, domestic policy architecture, even while the external environment was hostile. The lesson that period taught was that instability in your external relationships only breaks you if you stop functioning internally. The moment you pause domestic delivery to focus entirely on the external threat, you have already lost half the war. Notice what Carney did not do. He did not call a press conference to respond to the Commerce Secretary's remarks. He did not hold a summit. He did not issue a statement through the Foreign Affairs Ministry. He went to a construction site in Barrhaven and talked about geothermal heating. That absence, the deliberate refusal to engage the provocation on the terms it was offered, is a strategic move. It says, you do not set our agenda, we set our agenda. Call it the doctrine of parallel delivery. The idea that the most credible foreign policy signal a government can send is not what it says about the adversary. It is what it continues to build at home. Now let us widen the frame, because the stakes of this announcement reach further than Ottawa homebuyers. In the immediate term, the next 30 to 90 days, the impact is specific and measurable. Shovels go into the ground at 6 of the 8 Ottawa sites before the end of the year. The 1,400 units already under construction or breaking ground across Canada represent real employment: electricians, pipe fitters, concrete workers, project managers, suppliers. In a period when steel and aluminum tariffs are threatening jobs in the manufacturing sector, construction employment is a direct offset. Every unit started is a job maintained. For the wins in Canada, the 30-day picture looks like this. With the GST elimination already law and the development charge reductions flowing through to builder pricing, the homes being built at Geyser Place and the 7 other Ottawa sites will price at levels that were structurally impossible 6 months ago. The 3-bedroom unit that was out of reach in January may be within qualification range by June. The political map this reshapes is the map of Canada's working-class suburbs. The voters who have been priced out of home ownership are not abstract. They are concentrated in exactly the ridings that have been competitive in every federal election for the last 20 years. Housing delivery that is visible and verifiable, not promised, but happening, changes the political calculus in those communities in ways that no trade war position can replicate. And at the systemic level, the precedent being set here is significant. Canada is demonstrating that a federal government with a majority, a clear mandate, and an agency designed for a single purpose can move from announcement to shovels in 7 months on a housing program. That is not the normal pace of Canadian federal policy. The normal pace is years. The Build Canada Homes model, combining public land, early-stage financing, and modern construction methods under one agency, is being watched by other G7 governments facing the same housing crisis with the same political pressure. If the 10,000-unit pipeline becomes 100,000 units in 5 years, this becomes a model that reshapes how democratic governments think about housing delivery. But here is what this story is really about. It is not about the surface numbers. It is about whether Canada can answer a question that has been sitting unanswered for 30 years. Can a federal government in a federated country, in a trade war, with constitutional complexity around housing jurisdiction, actually deliver affordable homes at scale, fast enough to matter? The answer, as of April 23, 2026, is beginning to look like yes. Go back to the wins one more time, because this is where it ends, and it has to end here. In the scenario where the pipeline holds, where the 8 Ottawa projects get built, where the GST elimination stays law, where the development charge relief flows through, the Wynne family qualifies for a 3-bedroom unit in a city they want to raise children in. The mortgage payment is high. It is still hard, but it is theirs. And the cost of living inside that home, with geothermal heating cutting their energy bill permanently, is structurally lower than the rental market they are leaving. In the scenario where the pipeline stalls, where the trade war deepens, where construction costs spike beyond what the financing tools can absorb, where the political will dissipates after the next election cycle, the Wynnes are still renting in 2028, still watching their down payment target move, still paying more than 40% of their income to a landlord. That outcome is not theoretical. It is where Canada was heading for 30 years before anyone changed the trajectory. What Carney has not said, and this silence matters, is what happens if the trade war escalates past the current tariff levels. Steel and aluminum at 50% already compress margins on new construction. A broader escalation could push construction costs past the point where the financing tools inside Build Canada Homes remain sufficient. That risk is real. The agency was designed for a hostile but manageable external environment, not for a full-scale economic rupture. The one human truth underneath all of this is simple. Housing is not a financial instrument. It is the foundation of a stable life, and a country that cannot provide that foundation to its working people, regardless of what is happening on its southern border, is a country in structural decline. The question of whether Build Canada Homes becomes the beginning of a turnaround or another well-designed program that ran out of political oxygen is the most important domestic policy question in Canada right now. If this breakdown gave you something the trade war headlines buried, you already know what to do. This channel is not a media brand. It is the analysis that gets cut when the headlines get loud and the room gets crowded. If you want to be in the room when the next development breaks, and it will break faster than anyone is ready for, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Because the real story is never the press conference. It is the filing, the vote, the shovel, the family that moves in. One question before you go. Drop your answer in the comments. Option A, The numbers are real and the plan is working. 10,000 units in 7 months, $158,000 in savings, shovels in the ground. This is what delivery looks like. Option B. The scale is still too small. Canada needs hundreds of thousands of units, not 10,000. 7 months of progress is a start, not a solution. Which is it?